Wilds of Eldraine is coming out in just a few days, whether it's in paper or in Magic the Gathering Arena. This new standard set is also introducing a lot of cards for Commander, and of course Historic Brawl, which is like Commander for the people who play on their computers. And I'm not talking about MTGO. MTGO's Commander is weird and scary. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite cards, not necessarily commanders, that are in Wilds of Eldraine. I say that as a separate thing because I have a separate video talking about my favorite commanders from Wilds of Eldraine. In this one, I'll just be talking about supporting cards. Cards that are win cons, just interesting designs, or help an archetype or deck that already exists. And I'm going to start out with the White Craterhoof Moonshaker Cavalry. Moonshaker Cavalry buffs up all your creatures and gives them flying until end of turn. Now, if this seems familiar, I called it the White Craterhoof because it's a lot like Craterhoof Behemoth, except it doesn't give trample and it itself does not have haste. Where does this go? White token decks. Any go-wide deck that needs a big, splashy finisher is going to benefit a lot from Moonshaker Cavalry. This kind of card is also good in duplicates because you already have Craterhoof Behemoth. Having this and Moonshaker Cavalry in like your Selesnya tokens deck is a really good way to finish off a table. You have enough creatures, they get buffed based on a number of creatures, and you're also left with a big flying 6/6. It doesn't have haste though, which is a bit of a shame. It means that you're not going to be dealing quite as much damage as you could, but it's going to be really hard to block this thing. And all your other creatures are going to be really hard to block too, because flying isn't something a lot of people build into their decks. Now, sticking with white, we also have Expel the Interlopers. This is a board wipe, a modal board wipe, and there's always going to be a place for cards like these. This one cares about the power of the creatures being sacrificed. You choose a number between 0 and 10, and you destroy all creatures with power greater than or equal to the chosen number. That's great. If you want to keep just your little guys alive and take out the big things, then that's just fantastic. But of course, you could also name 0. I don't actually know what happens if you have something with negative power on the board when this resolves, but you could probably do something cute with that. Expel the Interlopers, not a major standout card, but it is a modal board wipe, which I think does give it a place in Commander and in Historic Brawl. Like this bunny, Regal Bunnicorn. This is a 2-mana creature that scales with the number of non-land permanents you have. On its own, in a completely empty board, it's a 1/1. And it's very cute. It's a rabbit unicorn, just look at it. But if you have lots of, let's call them game objects, whether those are tokens or creatures or enchantments, this bunny is gonna get big. And I bet there's also like somebody out there who's trying to make a rabbit deck and is just so happy to have another rabbit card. Now we're going to move into another creature, and this one might come as a surprise. It's a common Slumbering Keep Guard. This is a 1-mana 1/1 who's taken a big ol' snooze, and he gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each enchantment you control by paying just 3 mana. Now this can be activated multiple times within a turn, which means that this thing can get huge. But if that weren't enough, it also has a Constellation ability by any other name. It doesn't actually say Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. This card is in white, which is one of the 2 primary enchantment colors, and it's really sweet. It might not be card draw, but at 1 mana, I think this represents a win con card selection. It's a threat that you can get down at the start of the game to find your game pieces and eventually pump up to win. It's really cool to see this on a common, both because it actually looked really interesting for limited in this set, but also as a constructed piece. This is super cool. That's Slumbering Keep Guard. Don't sleep on this card. Spellbook Vendor. Oh, look at this shady human peasant who I think has a tiny monkey on their head. I say shady because I don't trust anybody who's like, yes, the spell book. It's definitely real and not at all filled with lewd images. This is a 2-mana 2/2 with a vigilance that at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay 1 and you make an enchantment. It's a sorcerer role token and you attach it to a creature you control, and you can attach it to a creature that already has a role as long as you get rid of the other role. This is just every turn, well, each of your turns, make an enchantment. Again, Enchantress decks love to have this. It's good for Constellation abilities, and it also represents getting a cool buff onto your cards. It's a +1/+1, and whenever this creature attacks, scry 1. I just think that that's a neat little spell that we are being sold. by the spellbook vendor. I do not trust this person. They're not actually selling you a book. That monkey's gonna steal from you. I don't trust the monkey. You know what? The spellbook vendor's fine. It's the monkey. Don't trust the monkey. What do we have? Stroke of Midnight. Now, a lot of people were talking about this card when it got revealed, saying, oh, wow, it's like Generous Gift. It is like Generous Gift. For 3 mana at instant speed, you can destroy a non-land permanent, and its controller gets a 1/1 white human creature token, which is a lot worse than a 3/3. But the downside of this, relative to Generous Gift, is that it can't hit lands. And that's fine. We don't need to be destroying lands here, at least not at my table. Stroke of Midnight is the kind of card you run as well as Generous Gift. Why limit yourself to just one when you can have both? If you're looking for some good white removal, I think Stroke of Midnight is it. I also think that this might have a place in Standard. I'm looking forward to seeing if it gets any play. Virtue of Loyalty. This is going to be the first in the Virtue cycle, many of which I included on this list. Now, the Virtue of Loyalty is a 5 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your unstep, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and untap those creatures. That's just nice if you're a go-wide creature deck, but it also has an instant where you make a 2/2 White Knight with Vigilance. You just make the token instant speed. That's a really great rate for making that token, and you can do it whenever. Because it's an adventure, you play the instant, then you play the enchantment later on in the game, and you're buffing up your team once each turn. I think it goes nicely with scales, it goes nicely with tokens. It's not insane, but it's still really good. Speaking of things that kind of clog up the board, 3 blind mice. Or, with this card, Chapter 1, make the 3 blind mice, 3 1/1 mice, then make a token that's a copy. So you make one, then you make the second, then you make the third. That's the way that these chapters are supposed to go on 3 blind mice. And then you get Vigilance and Trample until end, +1/+1 and Vigilance until end of turn. But that's not my intent with this card. 3 blind mice, if you make a copy of it, a token copy of it, with any number of ways that you can make a token copy of an enchantment, like Calyx or the new Selesnya legendary that's in the set, or, well, there's even, there's so many ways to do it. Just making a token copy of an enchantment is a thing that we can do now. And if you make 1 token copy of it, Chapter 1, make a mouse. Chapter 2, make another 3 blind mice, which means you make another mouse. And then the next turn, you make another 3 blind mice. It's the song that never ends, and it makes you a lot of little mice, if that's something you wanted. Now, if we go on, we're going to find Werefox Bodyguard. This is just kind of a nice tech piece. This is mostly for historic Brawl, but I think that it's also got some staying in power in Commander. We're exiling stuff. It's fun, it's cool, it's easy. 3 mana, 2/2, flash, enters the battlefield, exile another non-fox creature until this leaves the battlefield. You can also sacrifice it to gain some life. This is kind of like Brutal Cathar, but it's just in mono white, which is very nice. That's a red-white card, whereas this one can be played at any white deck. I think that it's not going to be too disruptive to combats, but it's disruptive enough. It's instant speed removal. It's exiling, though it's temporary exile, and it gets its effect doubled by Panharmonicon effects. Seems good enough to me. How about moving into blue with Asinine Antics? That's how I describe my stream. Asinine Antics. This is a 4 mana sorcery, but you can play it for 6 mana at instant speed, and it turns all of your opponent's creatures into a base power and toughness 1/1, because it curses them, which also, by the way, makes enchantments, if you care about things that make enchantments. For each creature your opponent controls, create a cursed roll token and attach it to that creature. It doesn't get rid of their abilities. It does turn them into 1/1s. This is just like a cool blue way of blanking the board. It doesn't get rid of +1/+1 counters, but I do think it does enough, and I love that. Chancellor of Tales. This is a fairy advisor that's specifically only good for adventures. But a lot of people are going to be building adventure decks, and I want to point out this uncommon because it's a lot like Lucky Clover, which you should also have in your adventure decks, and Corian, which might actually be your adventures commander. Chancellor of Tales is a 4 mana 2/3. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, you may copy it, and you can choose new targets for the copy. I said may, very importantly there, because Lucky Clover was not a may, which sometimes led to you only having one valid target for both sides of your, like, casting the same adventure, instant, or sorcery twice, and whoops, now the actual card has to go to a graveyard because the first ability resolves and destroys the card. That used to happen. Chancellor of Tales gets around that by making it into a May ability. Extraordinary Journey! XX blue, and a really weird ability. When it enters the battlefield, you exile up to X target creatures. For each of those cards, its owner may play it for as long as it remains exiled. They still have to pay all of their mana costs. Whenever one or more non-token creatures enters the battlefield from exile or was cast from exile, you draw a card. This only triggers once each turn. I oftentimes think that this will be cast for 0. X equals 0. This is just an enchantment you have on the board that draws you cards because your opponents are going to be casting things from exile. The real reason I put this on this list is I love the joke of, this card's good in Prosper. Well, this card's good against Prosper. Hey, Prosper, I see you out there casting spells from exile, and I draw a card. That's for me. That's why Extraordinary Journey's on this list. Ingenious Prodigy. I thought that this card was cool. Is it good enough for your deck? I have no idea, but I think it's fun, and you can proliferate it because it's an X blue. It's a Hydra. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and it has Skulk, which means it can't be blocked by creatures of greater power. Hey, that's great. That means this thing is hard to block, and it's oftentimes going to get damage through. Also, at the beginning of your upkeep, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from it and draw a card. I just thought this was a cool design. This is a mono blue Hydra. I don't care what anybody says. It's delayed card draw, and it's really sweet. I think this design is really nice. Going into another blue card, I mentioned before, there's the Cycle of the Virtues. This is Virtue of Knowledge, a 5-mana enchantment. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes the triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. It's a Panharmonicon that's an enchantment. Awesome! Also, Vantress Visions. Instant. Copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. That tends to be a very nice ability. Like Lithoform Engine as well, copying these abilities can be really nice for a commander. But this second part, having another Panharmonicon, people are always going to stack up these effects because they're good. And this one's good too. Ashiok's Reaper, the first card I'm going to talk about in black. Ashiok's Reaper is a 4-mana 3/3. Boring, I know, but whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. And this does include enchantment tokens. It also includes enchantments that self-sacrifice, like sagas. I think Ashiok's Reaper is a cool addition to the Abzan enchantments archetype, or even mono black. Hey, do you guys remember that there was a mono black enchantments theme in, oh gosh, was that no, it was Theros. Theros Beyond Death. There was a harpy who was like a mono black enchantments bird who was like, yeah, I want to exile them from your graveyard. This thing can go in that deck. A very specific build, but I still like it. Beseech the Mirror. This card's been getting a lot of talk, mostly because of Modern and Standard. Beseech the Mirror is a tutor with a bargain. It's 4 mana, and if you bargain, which is to say when you cast it, you also sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token of any type. You search your library for a card, exile it face down, and shuffle. If you bargained, and the card costs less than 4 mana, 4 or less mana, you can cast it for free. A tutor and a free cast. That's pretty nice. And if you don't have the bargain, then you just put it into your hand. This is a super cool, I tutor for my really good 4-drop, and I get it out for free. And before you say, oh, but you have to bargain. Bargaining seems to me like such a minor price to pay. If your deck already has artifacts, enchantments, and tokens in it, then you'll have fodder for this. And if not, at worst, it's an expensive tutor, which gets you your pieces, especially if you're doing weird combo stuff. Hopeless Nightmare. I love this for any black enchantment deck. 1 mana, enchantment, enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. Also, blink decks. If you have a way to blink this, amazing! When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you scry 2. It comes with a way to sacrifice itself, but it's so sweet. Everybody at the table loses life. Everybody at the table discards, except for you, sitting pretty with your Hopeless Nightmare. I think that this card is a stellar 1-cost tool for enchantment decks. It's fantastic. Lich Knight's Conquest. I don't actually know if I'd be able to pull this deck off, but you could build around this as a cool mass reanimation at 5 mana. Sacrifice any number of artifacts, enchantments, and or tokens. That is like a big bargain. Return that many creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. You know, I'm pretty good at making tokens. I'm really good at making tokens. And some things fill your graveyard while making tokens. There's a couple of sagas that do that. It's pretty sweet to see Lich Knight's Conquest as a combination sacrifice and reanimation card. Also, if you have enchantment creatures, if you have artifact creatures, you can return them to the battlefield. You can sacrifice them to the cost. It works. Just looking at the card. It doesn't matter what kind of artifacts or enchantments they are. As long as you're sacrificing them, you are helping pay that additional spell resolve cost. Now, Lord Skitter, the big Rat King. I didn't actually include the Rat King on this or on my list of commanders that I liked from the set, but I like Lord Skitter's Blessing. It's another good enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you make a Wicked Roll token. Nice. Wicked. Give a +1/+1 when the aura is put into the graveyard. You drain your opponent for 1. At the beginning of your draw step, if you control an enchanted creature, which this does enchant one of your creatures, it makes that aura roll, lose a life, and draw an additional card. It's like Phyrexian Arena, but cooler and cheaper and buffs up your creature. I think that it's a really neat card. Spectre of Mortality is a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card or multiple creature cards to your graveyard. When you do, each other creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, or X is the number of cards exiled this way. It's like a massacre, worm, girl, meat hook, whatever kind of massacre you care about. Spectre of Mortality is a Spectre of Massacres. It's also a 3/3 flyer, so it can leave itself on the battlefield and kill a bunch of other stuff. Blossoming Tortoise. I like Blossoming Tortoise because it will go good in my animated lands deck, which is still real, and it's not that good, but Blossoming Tortoise can still go into it. 4-mana 3/3 enters the battlefield or attacks. You mill 3 cards and then return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is the kind of ability that's also quite good in like a Gitrog monster or Windgrace deck. Activated abilities of lands you control, like filter lands or like activated creature lands, cost 1 less to activate. This making filter lands cost less is actually so sweet. Land creatures you control get +1/+1. Nice. This thing's doing a lot. It's putting things into the graveyard, it's getting them back out of the graveyard, it's discounting abilities, and it's making things stronger. Let's go, Blossoming Tortoise. You do you. Elvish Archpriest. You know that there was going to be a enchantress in this set. And there is. Elvish Archpriest, sorry, not Archpriest, Archivist. Wow, I'm doing great tonight. Is a 2-mana 0/1. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put 2 +1/+1 counters on this. Only triggers once each turn. Okay, well, maybe I was misspeaking when I said it's an enchantress card, because it also cares about artifacts, including artifact tokens and enchantment tokens. Also, whenever 1 or more enchantments enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Only triggers once each turn. That's fine enough for me. This thing only costs 2 mana. I'd say for 2 mana, it is doing so much, and it's doing a great job doing it. Gruff Triplets! And look at these! There's 3 Satyr Warriors, and what do? Well, they clog up the board, and I might go kinda infinite with some other cards. It's a 6-mana 3/3 with Trample. When it enters the battlefield, if it isn't a token, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. When it dies, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to its power onto each creature you control named Gruff Triplets. So for 6 mana, you're getting 9 power and toughness of trampling creatures. One of them dies. Now you have 2 6/6s. One of them dies. Now you have a 12/12 with trample. This is such a cool design of the card, and it works so awesome with Parallel Lives, Doubling Season, Anointed Procession. Honestly, anything that's doubling counters or tokens makes Gruff Triplets get so big, so huge, and so good. I do like my Gruff Triplets. Again, real buff. They're buff Gruffs. I think I interpreted how that card works. It's a weird one. I'm not feeling like rereading the ability now, though, because I want to look at Knight of Sweet's Revenge. This is worse than Jaheira, but we don't have Jaheira in Magic the Gathering Arena, at least not the Jaheira that lets me tap my tokens for mana. When Knight of Sweet's Revenge enters the battlefield, you make a food token. Food can be tapped for green mana. Nice. And you can pay 7, sacrifice this, and give your creatures +X, where X is the number of food you control. It's a sorcery speed ability, but this is a buff, it's ramp, and it's just a cool enchantment. This is the kind of card that I could see adding into a Samwise Gamgee deck or a Rocco deck to take advantage of all of your food tokens. Even more. I'm putting this into both of my decks of those types. And now, the royal treatment. Are you sick and tired of playing instants in your enchantment deck that don't make enchantments, but you want to protect your creatures and give them hexproof? Well, bam! Royal treatment. I'm giving your deck the royal treatment. Target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Give it a royal roll. And that royal roll gives it a forever ward 1. It's a +1/+1 and ward 1 aura. I like this. I think that this is just a better way to help protect things. It doesn't give indestructible, but it's giving a whole lot of other good stuff, and I could see running this in any Selesnya Enchantress deck. Keeping with the green, we've got Tanglespan the Lookout. This funky little uncommon draws you a card whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control. It's like half of an Enchantress. I still think it's worth thinking about, though. I'm thinking about this card right now. Yep, that's pretty good. A good-looking satyr. Now up the beanstalk. This replaces itself as a baseline, but if you're playing big creatures, it can draw you even more cards. 2 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield or whenever you cast a spell with a mana value, specifically mana value, 5 or greater, draw a card. Gorglaw, eat your heart out. Any big green rampy deck that's spitting out big boys is gonna love up the beanstalk because it helps you draw even more big boys, so you can cast even more big boys. Moving into red, moving into a red card with a black adventure, because we already looked at the red card. You know what? It gets weird. Here's Decadent Dragon. Decadent Dragon is a 4-mana 4/4 flying trampling dragon that makes treasures. And it also does crime! Oh, it has expensive taste. The instant adventure on this creature is exile the top 2 cards of an opponent's library. Don't mind if I do. You may look and play at those cards for as long as they remain exiled. You can cast them, by the way, for just their mana cost. So you have to make treasures or have other fixing. But if you're the sort of person who likes to do crime, Little Decadent Dragon is right up your alley. Also, just as a baseline, 4-mana 4/4 flying trampling dragon that attacks and makes treasure. Yes, please. Absolutely, yes, please. Ruby Daring Tracker. This is a Gruul legendary creature that goes amazing in Raga Draga. It's a 2-mana 1/2 with haste that taps for red or green. Nice. So if you care about mana dorks, well, she gets pretty big, and whenever she attacks, while you control a creature with power 4 or greater, she gets +2/+2 until end of turn. I put this on this list because I have a Raga Draga deck, because I revealed Raga Draga. I'm sure somebody else cares about this card. Maybe it's just me. I love Raga Draga. Next up is Apprentice's Folly. This is another kind of, listen, I know what deck I'm putting this in. It's Brutaclad. This makes copies, non-legendary copies, of a creature you control. Nice. And they have haste. Double nice. Also, they get sacrificed at the end of the saga. So you make 2 copies of Brutaclad, and you know what? It doesn't actually matter if your things are getting sacrificed, because guess what? All of them are going to have won the game for you by then. If it takes you more than 2 turns with Apprentice's Folly out and a Brutaclad deck to win the game, you didn't set up enough. Try again. Make more copies of stuff. This is also just cool, like really good if you have Enter the Battlefield abilities or other like weird stacking abilities you want to make copies of. I like this card though. It's an interesting ability. Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Her Soul Cauldron is filled with nasty soup that's made out of people. Yum. But it also is a really good piece of graveyard hate that buffs things up. It's a 2-mana artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you tap this to exile a card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It's good for scales, it's graveyard hate, it gives abilities, it fixes for those abilities. It's a really interesting card that's doing a lot, and I think is a very fun piece in a lot of different decks. Now, Ariette, or Ariette's Tempting Apple. I still don't know how to say her name. I think it's Ariette, but I don't actually know. This apple's a 4-cost food. That's very expensive food. When it enters the battlefield, though, it's an act of treason. That's right. Colorless decks just got an act of treason. You take control of your opponent's creature, untap it, it has haste. This costs only 1 more mana than a normal active treason effect, so, like, awesome. Also, it's a food, and it's a food that if you want to, you could also pay to and sacrifice to make your opponent lose 3 life. It's a blinkable active treason if you have a way to blink an artifact. It lets you grab things in colorless decks and sacrifice them. Maybe you're playing a mono-black deck, and mono-black is not that good at taking control of its opponent's creatures. Bam. Ariette's Tempting Apple. Maybe you're in, like, mono-blue and you're just getting cheeky with Thassa. You take something with the apple, then you blink it with the Thassa, and then it's yours forever. I really like this card. I think that it's an interesting idea to be like, yes, active treason is on a colorless artifact. Also a food. Delicious. Speaking of food, Sir Ginger the Meal Ender! Sir Ginger the Meal Ender is a 2-mana 3/1, but sometimes she has Trample, Hexproof, and Haste, and that sometimes is when your opponent has a Planeswalker. Okay, so this might not be that big for Commander, but that's huge for Historic Brawl. This is a great tech piece that you can put into any deck because it's colorless. Also, whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard for the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on her, and you scry 1. This does include tokens, such as treasure tokens or blood tokens, or clue tokens, game objects. You can also eat her. Oh. You can pay to tap and sacrifice Sir Ginger to gain life equal to its power. Aw. Please don't eat Sir Ginger. Her husband or whatever partner died in the War of the... or not War of the Spark, wow. In the Thrones of Eldraine trailer when it was eaten by Garruk. Sir Ginger does not need this in her life. And last, and certainly not least, is the Iron Crag. The Iron Crag is the first 2-mana mana rock printed into Standard since Mind Stone. And it's legendary. If you care about that for whatever reason, there's lots of decks that care about legendary cards. Kethis, just naming one. Whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can also choose to turn the Iron Crag into an equipment. It loses the mana ability, but now it has Equip 3 and gives +3/+3. Maybe you're done ramping. You don't need this anymore. Awesome. Guess what? Now it's an equipment. You can put this in Sir Gwyn. Because sometimes you just need to ramp to Sir Gwyn because she costs 6 mana for whatever frickin' reason. I don't know why, but she's a really cool card, and I want more cards like this. I like the Iron Crag. And I hope you liked this video, and you're excited for Wilds of Eldraine. I know I am. I actually already opened an entire collector's booster box. If you want to watch that video, it is on my YouTube. And I've been just hyping myself up because I'm actually going to be playing in paper pre-releases. Yes! I'm going to be going to Dragon Con this weekend and playing in the paper pre-releases there. I'm so excited. I have not played in a paper pre-release. Oh my god, when's the last one I went to? New Capenna? It might have been New Capenna at PAX East. And if it wasn't that, I think it might have been Eldraine. Like, Thrones of Eldraine.